Welcome to our discussion as we examine federalism. This is part 1 of 2. Federalism is the division of powers between a central government and regional governments. Most developed nations experience ongoing struggles over the relative powers of their central and regional governments. The United States has a federal system of government where the states and national government exercise separate powers within their own spheres of authority. Other countries with federal systems include Canada and Germany. In contrast, national governments in unitary systems retain all sovereign power over state or regional governments. An example of a unitary system is France. Let's examine the 3 types of federalism. First, we have a unitary system. A unitary system is where power is centralized. State or regional governments derive authority from central government. Next, we have a confederal system or a confederation. That should sound familiar to you because this is what we had under the Articles of Confederation. This is where power is held by independent states. Central government is a creature of the constituent governments. And next, we have a federal system, which is what we have now. Power is divided between the central and state or local governments. Both the government and constituent governments act directly upon the citizens. Both must agree to constitutional change. The framers of the U.S. Constitution sought to create a federal system that promotes strong national power in certain spheres, yet recognizes that the states are sovereign in other spheres. In Federalist Number 46, James Madison asserted that the states and national government are in fact but different agents and trustees of the people, constituted with different powers. Alexander Hamilton, writing in Federalist Number 28, suggested that both levels of government would exercise authority to the citizens' benefits. If their rights are invaded by either, they can make use of the other as the instrument of redress. However, it soon became clear that Hamilton and Madison had different ideas about how the national government should work in practice. Hamilton, along with other Federalists, including Washington, Adams, and Marshall, sought to implement an expansive interpretation of national powers at the state's expense. Madison, along with the other states' rights advocates, including Thomas Jefferson, sought to bolster state powers. So let's look at the types of power. We have, in a federal system, delegated powers that are given to the national government, powers that are reserved to the states, and shared powers, otherwise known as concurrent powers. This is set up by the 10th Amendment that says any powers not delegated to the federal government nor denied to the states are reserved for the states. So let's look at the delegated powers. We have regulating interstate and foreign trade, set standard weights and measures, create and maintain armed forces, make copyright and patent laws, establish postal offices, establish foreign policy, create federal courts, coin money, declare war, and admit new states. This is not an all-inclusive list. Next, you have your reserved powers. Create corporation laws, regulate trade within the states, establish and maintain schools. Some of those powers have been usurped by the federal government, especially under the Bush administration and the Obama administration. The Bush administration's No Child Left Behind set the precedent, and then Obama follows up with the Race to the Top initiative. Make laws about marriage and divorce, conduct elections, provide for public safety. Provide for public welfares under the shared or concurrent powers, administer criminal justice, charter banks, raise taxes, and borrow money. So let's take a second to do a multiple choice question. Of the following, American federalism is most clearly exemplified by the A, system of checks and balances among the 3 branches of the national government, B, process by which international treaties are completed, C, special constitutional status of Washington, D.C., D, 10th Amendment to the Constitution, E, President's powers to grant reprieves and pardons. Why don't you pause a minute and choose your correct answer? Welcome back. Hopefully you chose D. Federalism is a system under which the federal government shares power within the states. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution reserves to the states all powers not granted the national government by the Constitution. Therefore, it is instrumental in defining the relationship between the 2 levels of government, which is the essence of federalism. All right, so next, let's look at the difference between implied powers and enumerated powers. Let's look at implied powers first. While the Constitution carves out significant spheres of power for the states, it also contains several potential powers for the national government. These potential powers are also called implied powers. Include Congress's power under Article 1, Section 8 to make laws that are necessary and proper for carrying out its enumerated powers. That's the necessary and proper clause. The President's constitutional role as Commander-in-Chief has allowed presidents, including Lincoln, FDR, and now George W. Bush, to claim emergency powers for the national government in times of national emergency. Finally, the Supreme Court's original delegated powers in Article III were significantly enhanced in the case of Marbury v. Madison in 1802, where Chief Justice John Marshall first articulated the court's power to exercise judicial review. Judicial review is the power to strike down as unconstitutional acts of the national legislature and executive as well as the state actions. Examples of implied powers are Hamilton and the First Bank of the United States, a military draft, and then the income tax. Even though the 16th Amendment sets up the power to tax, it was not specifically an income tax. So let's look at enumerated powers. Enumerated means listed. The U.S. Constitution delegates specific enumerated powers to the national government, also known as delegated powers, while reserving other powers to the states, reserved powers. Article 6 of the Constitution declares the laws of the national government deriving from the Constitution to be the supreme law of the land, which the states must obey. That's the Supremacy Clause. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution, a part of the Bill of Rights, passed in 1791, attempts to limit national prerogatives over the states by declaring the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Examples of enumerated power: tax, coin and print money, declare money. That should say war. I'm sorry. That should say declare war. Next up, let's look at our types of federalism. First, you have dual federalism. This is also known as layer cake federalism, and it involves clearly enumerated powers between the national and state governments and sovereignty in equal spheres. This relationship predominated from the 1790s to the 1930s. Next, you have cooperative federalism, also known as marble cake federalism, and this involved the national and state governments sharing functions and collaborating on major national priorities. This relationship predominated between 1930 and 1960. Next, you have creative federalism, also known as picket fence federalism, which predominated during the period of 1960 to 1980. This relationship was characterized by overloaded cooperation and cross-cutting regulations. Lastly, as we trace the evolution of federalism, is new federalism, and this is sometimes referred to as on-your-own federalism. It's characterized by further devolution, which we'll talk more about in the next Prezi, of power from national to state governments, deregulation, but also increased difficulty of states to fulfill their new mandates. This period began in 1981 and continues to the present. Next, we have judicial federalism. There are other concepts of federalism that help describe the complicated relationship between the national and state governments. Judicial federalism involves the struggle between national and state governments over the relative constitutional powers of each and over key constitutional provisions, including the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment. With its power of judicial review, the Supreme Court is the arbiter of what the Constitution means on various questions, including federalism. Chief Justice John Marshall defended a national supremacy view of the Constitution in the 1819 case of McCulloch v. Maryland. In that case, the Supreme Court expanded the powers of Congress through a broad interpretation of its necessary and proper powers and reaffirmed national supremacy by striking down Maryland's attempt to tax the Bank of the United States. Not all judicial decisions favor national power. In the 1997 case of Prince versus the United States, for example, the court invalidated federal law that required local police to conduct background checks on all gun purchasers. The court ruled that the law violated the 10th Amendment. Writing for the 5-4 majority, Justice Anton Scalia declared the federal government may neither issue directives requiring the states to address particular problems, nor command the states' officers or those of their political subdivisions to administer or enforce a federal regulatory program. Such commands are fundamentally incompatible with our constitutional system of dual sovereignty. So let's look at some of the landmarks in the evolution of federalism. The 13th to 15th Amendments are early examples of the national government exerting its will over the states. The 16th Amendment allowed the national government to significantly increase its revenue abilities, which allows them to meet their constitutional responsibilities and assist states with grants and aid, among other things. We will talk more about grants and aid in our next Prezi. The 17th Amendment, senators are no longer directly accountable to the state legislatures, and many scholars argue that this has decreased the influence of state governments in national policy making. That has been our first Prezi on federalism. Make sure that you complete the quiz. Thank you.